everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on startup and IoT security. World Talent Economy Forum. We develop business incubation. Through the business incubation, we are engaging with thousands of entrepreneurs around Asia Pacific with the help of University Grant Commissions, World Bank, and ADB. So hopefully this session will help us a lot to learn more different things about startup, and especially we want to focus on IoT securities. Professor David Smith, what you want to discuss about startup and IoT security?
Well, Sharif, thank you. Very important topic today because IoTs or Internet of Things devices are growing at a fantastic rate as you look at towards the future of it. And if you just look at Internet of Things devices, they're growing on the order of 60% per year. More and more companies are beginning to get into it. And they have key roles in many, many different industries. But if I go and look explicitly at what I see in the security marketplace for Internet of Things, um, just to kind of give you a point in the road, in 2019, the IoT security market size was at about 2,221,000,000 in 2019. And by 2027, it's projected to reach almost $21 billion per year, again, just in the US market there. And that's a compound annual growth rate of over 32%, which is a tremendous growth rate today. And one of the big challenges you have in Internet of Things devices today uh, is, according to some recent surveys, uh, 98% of the IoT device traffic is unencrypted, which just means that the majority of confidential and personal information on the network that these IoT devices is using is very susceptible to cyber attacks, to privacy attacks, and it's a great pathway to get into other networks and have an impact there. And because these are coming so very, very uh, critical to so many of the different industries, it's one that security has to be brought down and really focused on. Post COVID, the attack on IoT networks has dramatically increased. And we're seeing that continue to spread. And we're beginning to see all different types of technology being brought to bear on this. Uh, and because Internet of Things leverages sensor embedded chips, they leverage all different types of other approaches such as blockchain and others. It's beginning to work there to have some real challenges. A couple of the leaders in some of the IoT device, um, Samsung and IBM, are developing something they call the Autonomous Decentralized Peer-to-Peer Telemetry Network. The acronym for it's ADEPT. And they're trying to use that to create a distributed IoT network that has the hooks embedded into it for security. Unfortunately, because many of the IoT devices are very low power devices, oftentimes very low compute capability, it's hard to put any of our traditional security systems on them to have an impact. And increasingly, these IoT devices are also wirelessly connected, and you're seeing the smart wireless connectivity in many different industries. One of the leader industries where the smart IoT connectivity is happening is in healthcare, which, as we all know, the security and privacy of patient data is a priority for healthcare providers. And so that's one of the other reasons the topic you've chosen today, Shreve, is very, very important, is it's being used in critical industries. It's being used in critical infrastructure. It's being used in logistics, which is one of the biggest problems we still have today as a fallout from not only COVID, but also the disruptions by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the activities going around on Taiwan is having globally and those disruptions. So Sharif, I hope that helped as a quick introduction to get into your topic.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Allen, you want to add any point about the startup?
This is not an area where I have delved much into I've delved into startups for sure, but not in the IoT realm. I think there's a great need for the security startups there to help, facilitate protecting those IoT networks. Um, they do seem ripe for exploitation by nefarious actors and have been done so. The camera bots that were used to do denial of service attacks in the U.S. A couple years ago. I forget the details, but security cameras around the country were actually hacked to be to send denial of service, messages. So simple kind of attack, but with enough bots doing it, made it effective. And there were enough exploitable video cameras out there providing security. I'm trying to do the air quotes there, but yeah, I mean, these were hackable instances. So I think there's a real need for starting businesses along those security lines, and I think somebody that can figure that out is going to make a lot of money. That's where I would start with. That's an important feature. I think there's also plenty of room in the space for new types of IoT connections. Whether it's your Fitbit or your watch or whatever. There's all sorts of APIs and apps that can be designed for that. And I think that's where most people are putting their efforts, and they're doing that because it is an open architecture that anybody can get into without any security protocols, or with very few security protocols. So I think the real leverage point for privacy and for security of like proprietary information, I think that is going to be it's an open frontier, but I think that will be the most significant aspect that one can take on in that frontier. So that's really all I've got. Be interested to hear more about what IoT people think of it, as opposed to just folks who are trying to start a business. There's business potential there. I'll conclude with that.
Excellent. Professor David Smith, as we know that we are developing business incubations, we are getting a lot of startup entrepreneur from around Asia Pacific. Can you describe the detailed procedure of developing startup, how they can develop a better idea, better startup, and they can solve the complex problem of the emerging economy?
Well, Sharif, really great question, particularly in the IoT space. As you know, Sharif, I'm part of a holding company that we have multiple companies underneath us, and one of our companies is an Internet of Things company called AIoT, because it's an AI-powered IoT type company, particularly in this instance, initially targeting the hospitality industry. And it's just a great example of how many different industries that IoT touches and can be used in. And it really is an open frontier for startups really today. IoT has been around for quite a while. With some of my background in the U.S. intelligence agencies, in DoD and companies, and having been the co-leader of the very first semiconductor roadmap, which is where part of the foundation for this technology comes out of. This technology is really 25 years old, maybe a little bit older than that. So we've seen it really go through multiple steps to where it's one now that you can start a company in the IoT space with not much money because the devices themselves are really very simple. And there's a lot of stakeholders in the area that are anxious to help get IoT devices in the field. Many of the major telecom companies, because many IoT devices use 4G and 5G networks as part of their backbone communications, and because the ability to handle their low bit rate communications from many of the IoT devices makes this a very lucrative business for the networks that many of the telecom companies have deployed, particularly in 4G, 5G, where they're, because of the nature of the communication protocols, low bandwidth is something they love to do because it lets them mix a lot of traffic over some very low bandwidth spaces. The ability to get started up in this is much the same as many of the others, Sri. You've heard me talk before that number one, it's not the technology, it's the people first. So if I'm a startup in the IoT space, I number one would like to look at the human capital I have available and how I can take that human capital and begin to bring it to bear in this area. I do have to have an idea of the IoT technologies I'm going to use, whether it's existing IoT or whether I need to take and expand new approaches in IoT devices, new inventions. But the next thing is really understand the area you want to launch your product and services into, products or services into. And then really take time to not only do a competitive analysis of the space, but then to understand the key care abouts of both the customers, the partners you're going to be working with, and any major suppliers. The IoT space is one that it's dependent on many different parts of the infrastructure string. And you really have to understand those to be successful. I can develop an IoT device that works great in a lab, but when I get it out into the environment, let's say I'm using it in trucking or shipping or other things like that, it fails because of challenges in the infrastructure or others. So you really have to understand the environment you're working in with the partners. And finally, we've talked about the importance of relationships and startups very often in your programs, Sri. You've got to see who are the important relationships there. It could be other commercial companies, it could be the government, it could be end customers, and particularly funding IoT companies is a little bit easier than some of the other marketplaces because the cost to get into the IoT business in most instances, not all, but most instances, is less than if I was trying to run some traditional companies. But those type of relationships are very important as it is in any area. Also, as you do your competitive analysis, understand where the largest segments are in the marketplace you're choosing to pursue and to go ahead and work that marketplace to understand the requirements, the unique needs, the competition as you begin to develop your minimal viable product in the IoT space. And you've heard me say this again also, you want to fail fast in the early days of a startup company, particularly in IoT, because there's not a lot of defined practices that you have there. So failing fast to get your answers is important. And final point on trying to answer your question about for a startup. Sharif, you hear me speak way too often about how everything today is a system of systems. IoT devices are parts of a system of systems. An IoT device by itself does little good. It has to be parts of other systems, which are part of other systems, which are part of other systems. Even most IoT devices themselves are made up of systems of a system. So your startups should be very familiar with uh, looking at that, trying to understand the place in a systems of systems world and what platform the IoT devices would utilize and be part of, and who are the important stakeholders. Again, is it someone who's a competitor? Is it someone who's a could be a partner? Is it someone who could be more customers and understand those and cultivate those relationships, which is key for a startup in any vertical field today. So, Sharif, I hope that answered part of your question about the startups.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Allen, you want to add any point about startup? Okay. Yeah. If you want to add any point, the developing procedure of startup, can
And
you
you're
unmute
muted.
yourself?
Alan, you're muted. There you
Now,
go.
okay, Mr. Allen.
Okay, yeah, I'm apparently I'm muted, unmuted. Anyway, I've got an incoming call that I've got to take, so I'll refrain.
Okay, Mr. David Smith, like how a local company can develop themselves as an international corporations. What is the procedure? How they can develop themselves? Because we have many SMEs, they have a plan to improve themselves and move to the next stage.
Um, the way to go international in any product, whether you're in a developing or developed nation, is part of it's the same, part of it is different. Let me start with what is very similar. When you bring most products to the market today, and I'm distinguishing products differently than services. When you bring most products to the market today, most of them are pretty much international at launch because you're serving an international market. But one of the challenges you look at bringing many products to the market is the language barrier. And one of the things you have to do today is you have to design your products today from early in the product development cycle to be able to be what's called internationalized. When that includes languages, it includes units, metric measurements versus non-metric measurements, temperatures, centigrade versus Fahrenheit, and just the language differences. With the growth of natural language processing, machine learning, image recognition, it's become much easier to handle multilingual applications. On many sides using intelligent chat boxes, I can translate in real time from what a potential customer is saying and others, and translate bidirectionally. So the technology is beginning to help a lot more there. But the ability to design for international distribution is important. The other huge challenge for your startup, Sharif, going international, is they need to understand that there's different cultures they're dealing with than where they originated. They need to understand that the compliance rules, the laws, the regulations are often very different than where they are. I'm on the investment committee and a mentor at the International Accelerator, which is actually housed here in Austin, Texas. And we see pitch decks every month from a number of international startups. And compliance is one of the places where most international startups are tremendously lacking. They might be a startup in the healthcare space or an Internet of Things healthcare device and not understand HIPAA, not understand the federal drug administration, not understanding that the very different ways you have to do with device management in healthcare spaces versus a normal commercial device. All of these are issues that can kill a product, for example, coming in the United States, or if I'm going into Europe, some of the enhancements today of the GDPR, and particularly as it relates to healthcare, could be a killer there. PRC is proposing their first device type of security compliance, particularly in healthcare. And China has a huge market there, but they are getting into the same act of wanting their own unique compliance, their own unique security and privacy rules, like just the rest of the world. So if I were to look for your startup company coming into the United States, in the United States today, 31 of the 50 states have their own variations of their privacy rules. And for you to distribute across the United States, you have to be aware and be able to meet all those 31 different state requirements, as well as the federal requirements that are in place from there. So compliance for your startup, Sharif, is a huge, huge, huge concern. So we've talked about the differences in culture, the differences in compliance, privacy, security, and others. The third big thing I see is startups when they're wanting to go international is there is a real hesitancy by many startups to expand the team internationally. You might use some offshore developers or like that if you're in some of the larger, but you building a team, particularly for a sales team, for marketing team, that's made up of people who have experience in these nations, experience in the culture, is always a plus. Again, many startups have challenges with understanding and who have challenges with beginning to adapt to those type of international needs. At South by Southwest, I was on a panel this year dealing with international startups. And within the room, one of the biggest concerns with international startups was, and I didn't see this since I am based in the United States, but they said it's when they are trying to expand internationally, the approaches to funding is very different as you look at different parts of the world. So if I'm a startup and I want to expand into the EU, there's a lot of government and non-government organization money available in the EU. If I want to expand into Africa, if I want to expand in part of Eurasia and some other places like that, there's not as much government money. There's, and for example, in Africa, there's not a lot of private money being devoted towards Africa. There's a fair amount of non-government organization money going on. In the United States, North America, actually part of South America, you have some more traditional approaches to funding. But as a startup, you need to understand that if you're targeting other parts of the world for your initial international efforts from where you're based, you need to understand what are the nuances that are very different from you. Funding, hiring, compliance are some of the unique ones in there. The other unique thing that you have to understand in internationalizing startups, like you were talking about, is what are the data governance rules? And that's becoming much more critical today. Many countries are beginning to say the information about people who are their citizens has to be stored within the country or within their, for example, within EU has some rules in this way. There's very stringent rules on data governance, particularly in Asia. And failure to comply with the data governance rules can result in very, very hefty fines and penalties. So as a startup, those are some of the major things I think they have to consider. But again, remember, number one is human capital. And that's the most critical thing that is important to the success or failure of any startup. I hope that answered your question, Sharif.
Yes, Professor David Smith. Yeah, Professor David Smith. Another major challenge is raising fund for the company. You are expert on that particular area. What is your advice? How the company can raising fund in this complex economic situation?
It varies a lot by market, and it is different. Let me answer first for IoT security, and then generalize some more. What is really good for a startup in the IoT space is the devices and applications are invading almost all aspects of human life. I mean, it's going into our homes, our cars, our workplaces. Even IoTs are going into our own human body. And to take advantage of this, you've heard me think one of the biggest things today is the world has gone mostly digital, and everything that's digital is being communicated. And so you see that, and that plays so true in IoT devices because by definition they're on the internet, and that takes the importance there. You see IoTs growing rapidly, as I said, because the introduction of IPv6, 5G, that's causing a tremendous growth. But those are the same things that make it really right for hackers and for the criminals on this one. And so you see that, but it's also the same thing that makes it very applicable for the startups. It makes it easier for them to raise money for in many different ways. You know, by 2025, there's going to be over 26 billion connected Internet of Things devices. And that's such a significant growth in market. And the fact that you're seeing it grow by such a large, very large compounded annual growth rate of a market that's been around for a while, the ability to raise money is going to be easier than some of the other areas, particularly the security of IoT, because IoT is not going back. They're not going to be able to put it back in the bottle. And it's going to continue to grow. And it's very important that it continue to grow. Again, the very first thing you have to do raising money is have a good story. And the story, particularly in Internet 2, has to be one that's easy to understand because not many investors understand Internet of Things. And how is the Internet of Things different from a plain sensor? What makes it different? What is the intelligence in an Internet of Things device? Hard for a lot of people who fund innovation and start companies to understand. as I've said before, human capital, your team is very important in raising money as a startup. People in the startup, in the first uh, parts of funding, be it friends and family or a pre-seed round of funding, um, they're investing in the people, not the technology. They're investing in the people. So you have to have a very good team. A good, I believe you have to have a good set of advisors in many of these areas to help attract funding. And advisors should help you seek funding and acquire funding. Um, if you're going into a marketplace that already has a fair amount of competition, it's very important for you to have mentors um, who can help you avoid the scars they've had in that marketplace and to help take you around pitfalls, to help you find new customers for your minimally viable product. You know, today, if I'm developing a device I want to sell in the B2C space, everyone wants Amazon or Alibaba or others to be their partners. But the reality is they can't really partner with that wide of a range of verticals and that wide of a range of possibilities in the world marketplace. Um, so it's important to understand that as well. Um, my other thought that starts on this one is Internet of Things, because of the fact that they're most of the time embedded. They're embedded parts of other products. They're embedded parts of other systems. You have to create a story around Internet of Things that shows how important they are to the end applications in the area. Does it just give you more data? Does it give you more data that can enhance productivity? Is it giving you more data that can save lives? Is it giving you more data that can have a value proposition for the investors? Just like you have to have a value proposition for your customers, it is very, very important that you can create a value proposition for any uh, in for any investors that they can understand. And remember, a particularly venture capitalist type of investment, they're in business to make the people who funded their investment pool money. And so they're wanting you to come with a story, to come with credibility, to come with a team, the technology that can make the investors they have in their fund a return on money. And that's the key there, is creating a story that has all those parts in it, and to do it in a way, because the Internet of Thing marketplace is moving fast. So speed is very important to that startup tree. And so raising money has to be done at speed as well. And you might want to have in your development cycle for your product um, multiple capability checkpoints, and use each of those capability checkpoints as a way to raise pre-seed money into the company. And Sharif, I know that was kind of a long answer, but those are some of the real important parts for those startups and trying to have them seek funding.
uh, Professor David Smith, when we working with different entrepreneurs, different startup, we find leadership is a major challenge right now. Like how they play a role for the company, how they can develop themselves as a good leaders for the company. This is important. So, what is your advice for leadership role for a startup and for a company?
Well, that's the most important part of the human capital stack. And I'm going to give you multiple answers to that one because I think it's important. Number one, a leader, a potential leader, should understand there's a lot of activities out there to help. You see so many global incubators and programs that will bring you into their fold. Here in Austin, by itself, there's probably over 70 different organizations, some of them national, some international scope, that will help a budding entrepreneur come in and learn skills, learn how to do an investment debt, learn how to define what a minimal viable product is. But one of the things that you're going to hear said in all of those, or most of them, is that finding a mentor, finding several mentors, is very important for developing the leadership skills. Yeah, I like to tell some of the people I mentor that I have the scars on my back and on my chest that I don't want them to get. And that's why you bring in folks who are seasoned as a mentor. Mentors usually cost a little bit of stock or something in your company, but they're usually not a huge monetary cost as you see in some of the classic training. And once again, it's one of those real important things is to find good mentors. And this is going to sound well, mentor your mentor relationships. Most mentors, me included, I don't want it to be a one-way relationship. I want to hear back from the startup leaders as well. I want to learn as I work with other people I'm mentoring from them, and not just be a one-way relationship. All of the friends I know who are really good mentors, same comment from them. They want it to be a two-way relationship, not just you believing you're in Socrates' time using the Socratic method and telling them. You want that two-way part of it. Leaders need to develop a sense of empathy for where their team is located. You know, I believe in group intelligence, and a good leader understands group intelligence. And part of cultivating group intelligence is the empathy for your team, which is most likely a distributed team. And good leaders have to be good listeners and listen in the company, listen to their partners, listen to potential customers. And as a leader, it's really hard to work on listening skills. And particularly if you're talking in an international environment where your customer's language might not be your own language, and oftentimes get lost. You know, it's funny things that can disrupt companies. I've seen companies lose customers, and I've seen companies lose the ability to do some of their activities because of cultural differences. The okay sign. In some countries, what we use in the United States as an okay sign is an insult to people and others. And so just something as simple as I'm okay can result in lost customers, lost money. And you have to understand that. And those are hard skills. Those are very, very hard skills to learn. And you need to be able to network. Leadership should be networking. They should be out. They should be talking to people. And that talking to people is important to them as they try to move forward. And they need to take the time to understand how to move forward by networking. Many, particularly startup leaders, underestimate the importance of networking, underestimate the importance of relationships, underestimate the importance of mentors. And those are all things that I help think through create a good startup leader.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, another important aspect, like, what do you think? How entrepreneurship initiative, this technology like IoT, can help economic growth, or how they can support the emerging economy or even the developed world more?
Well, for example, IoT technologies are going to be the key to smart infrastructure growth and smart infrastructure development, which in turn is going to promote a lot of economic development. So, smart communities, smart cities, intelligence buildings, intelligent factory floor, and others are models that aim to create cutting edge services and infrastructure. And those increase the livability and effectiveness of the regions, the cities they're in, which affects growth, which affects startup, which affects education and others. And that way you see the ability to do that growing and being successful. So technologies like data communication, clouds, mobility, and sensors make IoT type of devices critical, not just critical, crucial to implementing these smart cities, smart regions, smart communities. And that's going to create the economic growth that you're mentioning that is really needed. And you see that the Internet of Things devices themselves can be broken down into so many different areas. And to kind of put just Internet of Things in place with economic development growth. One of the most significant growth areas for IoT is actually the Asia Pacific region. So the region you're in, Sri, and it's expected to grow very rapidly there. Is that you see in your part of the world, Sri, uh, the regional growth, the regional security growth, the sensor growth is experiencing a lot of growth, particularly at the area of expanding government incentives, uh, particularly the raising demands for quick computing, virtualization, analytics, security, high volume network, and particularly in the Asian Pacific area, we're seeing dramatic increases of both the fiber optic networks and the high bandwidth wireless networks as well. We're seeing, for example, in North America still a lot of growth, but a lot of the infrastructure is more stable and moving at a different rate than particularly Asia Pacific. Uh, and you just see so many big companies uh, playing in this marketplace that can directly go back and help as you look at this. And even in the IoT security area itself, there's so many sub markets in that, from device authentication, identity access management, intrusion protection on it, data encryption, tokenization, uh, different approaches to secure the entire network, different approaches to secure the devices. Uh, how batteries and the future of batteries are going to affect Internet of Things devices is huge. You're seeing it also being used in the verticals very different, in manufacturing, retail, healthcare, e-commerce, government, defense, logistics, energy, utilities. All of those have different growth paths and different ways to fund and pull companies into those areas. And it's one that is going to have, in some ways, higher profit margins than some of the other industries because of how critical they're going to be to the growth of products and services in those areas. Um, and many of the other technologies we've talked about on your programs over the last 900 plus, like the edge of cloud, the digital twins, um, the digitalization, even blockchain will have a big impact within this market segment street, and are ones that should create a lot of opportunity, should create opportunities for funding, but are all of those areas are critical for the economic growth of the regions of where the products are being developed or the products are being sold into, particularly with IoT.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, like, what's your advice for our youth community, those who are developing startup, those who are working in IoT security industries, and how they can help more the global community through their new skill set?
Well, um, the young, the young community is actually at an advantage in some ways in the Internet of Things devices. Um, Most of them have grown up in a time where they were not connected to the internet. And so the type of connectivity you have with an IoT device is natural to them. And it's easier for them to take and extrapolate that to today's marketplaces. Um, Most of the younger entrepreneurs have grown up in a time of great connectivity, and the use of social media and other uh, approaches such as that is common to them and not something that they've had to learn. Um, and so that should be an advantage. Um, what is a disadvantage to many of the younger startups is the importance of compliance. And that's overlooked by most of the very young startups uh, and startup teams. Whereas some of the older folks understand that compliance is one of the things you have to do early and first before you can actively sell the product. Um, Probably my other thing in that one for young startups is they always underestimate the amount of time it's going to get a product ready for market, and then they underestimate how rapidly it's going to grow in the market. Many markets, particularly as I look across different regions of the world, many markets already have quite a few competitors in it. But yet, many startup entrepreneurs, particularly the younger ones, believe that they might will introduce a new product and their sales will go to 100% of the market availability. And that just doesn't happen. I mean, part of your market availability is the people who do not buy your product, and that counts against it. Part of the market vulnerability on that is how can I go to market and I'm not known and compete against companies that are known? And again, it gets back to your network. It gets back to your joint venture partners if you have them. It gets back to your mentors, the way you work globally. Do you want to be part of regional accelerators like the international accelerator I mentioned earlier? Focuses on bringing international CEOs from their home country into the United States and establishing U.S. funding, U.S. markets, U.S. distribution, uh, and also, yes, U.S. teams that are part of that. All of those are important to the type of entrepreneur segment that you were mentioning, Sharif.
Thank
I
you,
hope that
Professor.
helped.
Thank you, Professor, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Your contributions actually help us a lot to develop our emerging economy. So thank you for your contribution. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academy. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.